The Eaters of Light, the penultimate story of the 10th series of Doctor Who, was the first time I ever remember feeling distinctly disappointed by an episode of Doctor Who when it first broadcast. Admittedly, I did feel a similar way towards Extremis previously in the series, but that was mainly because of how complex it was. I just didn't get it and didn't connect with it. However, The Eaters of Light is a very bog-standard Doctor Who story at the end of the day, and I didn't connect with it. And I can tell you the reason why. It's because it was written by Rona Munro, who wrote Survival, the last story of classic Doctor Who, and for me back then and even now, it's an all-time favourite of mine. And as well, it was the first time, and I believe the only time, that a classic Doctor Who writer has come back to write something for the modern era. And there was a certain novelty of that, and my, kid brain was really excited. It was something very exciting and new, and when it came out and it wasn't Survival, this story is not nearly as good as Survival, but because of that, it just was disappointing in comparison, and therefore I just thought nothing of the story. The only thing I remember for years was it was the one where Nardole wore a dressing gown. In the subsequent years, it was a story that I'd never really thought about. It was one of the few stories from Series 10 that I rarely went back to, and that seemed to be what everybody else thought. It seemed to be looked as one of, if not the weakest of Series 10, and just a really bland, forgettable, not very good story. However, what the Chris Chibnall era has taught me is that your true opinions come about after the fact. When all the hype has died down, when all of the buzz surrounding new Doctor Who has died down, and when you leave behind any preconceived notions you go into an episode with, that's when your true opinion can form, looking back on something objectively. When you have none of that, you just look at the episode on its own merit. And that's what I did on a recent rewatch of The Eaters of Light, and I found that not only did I enjoy it, but it's actually more like Survival than I initially thought way back in 2017. The main point of comparison is it being a coming-of-age story. Obviously, with Ace's time on the show, she started off as a brash young teenager, and then developed into a more wise, mature woman due to travelling with the Doctor, and it was really built upon in season 26 and culminated in Survival, where she had lots of trials and tribulations, had to be more independent, fend for herself, and there's some subtext in that story of her sexuality, and, really gaining an understanding of her identity as a grown-up. And I think this sort of journey, this coming-of-age journey, can be seen in the side characters of the Eaters of Light, with the Roman soldiers and the Scots. I think, they're all kids, basically. The oldest of the Roman soldiers is an 18-year-old, and whilst they might seem all tough and older, they're just a bunch of scared kids in reality. The creature just wipes the floor with them. But then at the end of the story, a group of them go into the portal to stop the creature, and that's very much them, growing from children to adults. That's how I see it. And I think it was really fun seeing that link of Rona Munro's writing style. It's clear that she has an affinity for that kind of story. On a more general note, I think that the dynamic between the 12th Doctor and Bill bears a lot of similarities to 7 and Ace anyway. That kind of teacher-student dynamic is very much present in the 7th Doctor and Ace, but it's very explicit in 12 and Bill, the teacher-student dynamic. It bears a lot of similarities, and again, it's another sort of parallel to Survival. That's another thing looking back in hindsight. I love this TARDIS team. I did then, and I still do now, and I think because obviously this was my first series of Doctor Who, I have an affinity to that TARDIS team. I love the dynamic, and also, obviously, Nardole's here as well, but I love that TARDIS team, and I think as we get further away from this era, from when this was broadcast to now, we've had a whole showrunner's era. The further we get away from it, the more I sort of crave of it, and that's why I liked coming back to this one, because I didn't really like it that much as a kid, but obviously now, it's, I can rediscover it again, and I get more of the 12 Bill and Nardole dynamic, It's a win-win for me. As for other things about the episode, I quite like the conceit of what happened to the 9th Roman Legion when they disappeared. I think that's a good conceit that the episode plays around with a little bit. I like the mystery that provides, and overall, I think the direction and the music really adds to that atmosphere of mystery and mystique, and there's almost like a fantasy element to it. It almost feels like a folktale. I think that's helped with the bookending beginning and end segments in the modern day with those kids visiting the monolithic, stones, and there's the Raven there. I think those bookending scenes, add to this idea of it being almost a folktale. I think it's really good. And I also really like the Missy thing at the end. I love the Missy arc in Series 10, and, it's a nice scene. So for me, The Eaters of Light has gone from a 5 out of 10 story to a low 7 out of 10. Look, I never said this was one of the best Doctor Who stories ever, and it's easily one of the weakest from Series 10, but For me, you know how much I love Series 10. It's my favourite series of Doctor Who, of the modern era, definitely. And, look, I love it. I'll just ease up as much of Series 10 as I can get, because, well, I love it. And I just engaged with this story more, and I enjoyed picking on Monroe's writing style and picking up little traits that she had and what you can sort of see in this and Survival, and you can kind of compare them. I quite like that, and it engaged me. And the lesson here, really, is if there's a sort of mediocre or forgettable episode of Doctor Who when you first watched it, or something that disappointed you on first broadcast, I think the main thing is that give it some time and go back to it, where you'll have none of the hype, none of the pretense, none of the fan discourse in the moment. You just have you and the episode for you to judge it coldly and objectively. Sorry, this is future me here. I don't know why that was such a downer of an ending. I think it's just because Series 10 is now over half a decade old, but I don't know why that was such a downer of an ending. So here's some memes.
Nana, you won't believe this. I was at the top of this huge rock, and all of a sudden...
My life is nothing but a comedy.